Hello, everybody. Happy November. October's finally over. I hope you guys had a nice Halloween. I had my first Halloween here in Toronto, and it was very, very amazing. We went to Church Street here in Toronto with a couple of friends, and we dressed up. Uh, Me and two friends of mine, like two of us got dressed up as Dalmatians, and one of my friends got dressed up as Cruella. And it was just a very funny experience because you have all these people who come and take pictures of you anytime you have like an interesting costume. So it felt surreal for a moment there, just standing there, like having like literally hundreds of people snapping pictures of us. That was very fun. And I also took like dozens and dozens and dozens of pictures with other people as well. So yeah, that was my little Halloween recap. I hope you guys had fun too. Whether you did something on Tuesday, or whether you went out on the weekend, or whether you just gave candy to kids here. I didn't get to do candy duty this year, so sad. Hopefully next year I will be able to. Now, as for reading, October hasn't really been the best reading month for me, and I kind of blame myself for it because of certain choices that I made regarding books that I want to read, um, which led me to read these books quite slowly because I wasn't really that into reading them anyway, which kind of got me into a reading slump. So unfortunately, I only like ended up reading three books in October, and none of these books were books that stuck out to me in any way. So it wasn't like any amazing reading month. These might be some unpopular opinions because there are two books here that a lot of people tend to like. I personally, it just wasn't my thing. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about them. I will start with a book that I just randomly found in my local library, and I was, curious about reading it. And that book is called A Lady in Shadows by Lene Kaaberbøl. I'm sorry if I mispronounce that name. The author is Danish. So, yeah, that book basically intrigued me because it was set in the 1800s in France, and it talks about a mystery, and the detective here is a woman. So that is quite an intriguing book, and I would say that this book was my favorite out of all three books that I read this month. So basically, we explore the story of a young woman who lives in France in the 1800s. She's a very intelligent, astute, critical, analytical thinker, and she basically gets involved with solving the case of a bunch of women who were actually uh, murdered in the area, and the murder was quite brutal. They were basically opened up in brutal, harsh ways. However, there was no sign of struggle, so there was no sign of struggle on their bodies. All they found was like corpses of these women with their insides basically opened up. So we are basically this is the main mystery of the book. However, there's also another storyline that is also important and very enjoyable. This person, this woman, she is basically attending university. And that was a huge thing back in the 1800s because most women were not permitted to attend universities. So one of the instructors back in the day, he actually accepted having her in his class. So she's basically studying anatomy, and you basically see her try to prove herself as a student in a male-dominated field where people would always, discourage her or basically put her down because of her gender, right? So this field of study is not really for the faint of heart because you have to basically dissect living animals and kind of look into their insides and analyze them in a very cold and detached way. So we see how this character, her name is Madeline, or Madeleine, if it's like we're speaking French in here, she basically has to struggle to prove herself in such an environment, even if it goes against her natural uh, personality, because a lot of people are sensitive to those types of things, not just women. So I could never like imagine dissecting a live animal, like never. But yeah, in this book, it's basically that is painted as a feminine thing, and that's an urge she has to overcome. So that's very interesting to see. We also uh, deal with this assumption that all women are basically made to reproduce and to basically, uh, populate the country. And that is a very dominant point of view. That was a very dominant point of view back in the day. And we see, this character, she's basically trying to work to basically rise against that assumption and to be who she really is and to basically push her studies and to push her mind and to be her own powerful, independent person in this very sexist environment. What I also found very interesting about this book is the fact that her partner is actually a bisexual man. So I found that to be very interesting because I don't really see a lot of bisexual representation much in books I've read at least. And that was very interesting to read. We basically see her struggles dating a bisexual man and basically any type of relationship issues that can come up in that sort of dynamic. So that was also very interesting. Uh, Overall, it was a nice book. Uh, the mystery is quite dark in a way, and I generally liked how it unfolded. It didn't blow me away, in any big exceptional form, but it was still a decent read, and I recommend it if you guys like a cozy little mystery set in the 1800s, and if you enjoy these themes that are being discussed, I think that's a very perfect read for you. Uh, I don't know if there aren't really any issues I have with the book. It's just that it wasn't something spectacular. It was just an interesting read. I would give it a 3 stars, I guess. And it was definitely the most decent read out of the 3 books that I read this month. So yeah, if you're into mystery, go check that book out. Especially if you like those themes, and if you're into reading about this female character who's just very analytical and she's extremely observant. Uh, there's also a lot of interesting tidbits of information regarding anatomy in general, Like I learned a lot about the anatomy of octopuses, about, I don't know, some uh, androgynous or hermaphrodite animals who produce asexually. That was also very interesting. And we also, have little tidbits of very useful anatomical knowledge that, complement the book very well. Now, for the next one here, again, this was like a very hyped up book, but it didn't really live up to my expectations that much. It's called Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Now, this book actually won the science fiction awards on the best science fiction book on Goodreads. So I was quite interested in picking it up, but at the same time, I was kind of hesitant because I know that this book kind of discusses pandemics in a way, and I'm not really a fan of pandemic sci-fi. It's just a personal preference. However, that didn't end up being the main reason I didn't like that book that much. Again, it was just okay, nothing amazing. So basically, in this book here, we deal with 3 separate time periods. Uh, so 3 different point of views. Uh, so we have the first one where we're basically in the beginning of the 1900s and where somebody has been exiled from the UK into Canada, and basically we are having to deal with the repercussions of that exile for a short while. And then we also deal with the present day, like right now, and the early 2020s, where the COVID pandemic was still a thing. And we also go all the way into the far future, uh, where we basically have a moon colony, So very distinct time periods. And what is the main mystery here is that all of these three storylines kind of connect in a way, and there is one instance that basically connects all of these events together, and you as a reader have to figure out what it is as you're reading the, as you're reading the book. Uh, so the pandemics were, like a very major theme, because we even like have a pandemic that is much more serious and severe that happens way after the COVID-19 pandemic happened, which like had more severe consequences, and we basically explored how certain characters have been negatively impacted by this pandemic. And we also have, time traveling here as a theme as well. And in this book, basically, this time traveler has to figure out what is the main connecting factor between, all these different time periods, right? So it was that part was very nicely done. I enjoyed that part a lot. And then we also have the moral dilemma of time travel, because like when we travel back in time, we basically, with the knowledge of what has taken place, we know how certain people are going to die or what will happen to certain people. So there is the moral, ethical dilemma of whether we allow that to happen when we travel back in time to be able to preserve, the flow of time as it is, or our conscience would basically, overpower our rational mind, and we basically step in to change what happened because we just can't stand seeing somebody going into their doom and not doing anything, and what consequences that might have. So I found that to be an interesting spin as well. Now, what I did not like so much about this book is that we have different time periods that are being discussed. However, the writing style did not drastically shift between each time period. Now, the first one in the early 1900s, that was actually interesting, and I did kind of feel a different type of energy there, but not by too much. But the next two, like we are basically exploring the modern times, and then we're going into the far future. The writing just felt very similar, and it didn't really make me feel like I'm in a very different space when it comes to, you know, social development and humanity as a whole, because like we're in a place now, and 1 second we're in a place where we're basically in modern times, and then another place we are on the moon, but I just didn't feel any atmospheric change as much as I would have liked. So I don't know if that made sense to you guys, but that was basically a qualm I had with this book. Um, Also, I feel like I didn't get a satisfying explanation as to what happened. I don't want to say what the main connecting factor is in all of these instances, but like when you do basically find out what it is, I don't know. I personally was like, okay, but what caused that? What is the bigger implication here? Uh, because the main theory here is that we're all living in a simulation, basically, but we don't really have any proper explanation for that, and maybe that might have been an authorial choice to basically leave this as a little mystery that's hanging, which, okay, that's fair, but I don't know, I just expected a little bit more out of it. So yeah, that was basically my opinion regarding the book. Now, after having read this book, I found out that this book is basically set in the same universe as two other books she has written, and other characters from those books are actually mentioned and do appear here in a certain capacity. So I think this book was meant to be read after I read those two books, which is why I didn't really get to appreciate the characters that much, because for me, they just came out of nowhere, and I felt like, I don't know, I wasn't really satisfied with the story. So at some point in the future, I think I'm going to read the previous books that are set in this universe, and then, maybe I can appreciate A Sea of Tranquility more. But as far as it stands, it's also like a 3 stars for me, nothing spectacular. Now, for the third one, I was dreading this one the most, to be honest. And yeah, like I wasn't disappointed in that way because I didn't have much expectations, but I really wanted to read it because it was in the local library here, and I was curious. This is basically The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Now, I've actually read uh, Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. I'm rereading it now, so I really love her writing style when it comes to fantasy. But this one, I knew that this was urban fantasy, so even by looking at the cover, I was like, okay, maybe I'm not gonna enjoy this too much because it's basically set in New York City, right? And it's just a very urban book. What I mean by that is that the setting is just very realistic. It's very American. It's very like you have a lot of local language. You have a lot of slang. You basically feel like you're immersed into that culture, and then you have weird fantasy happening around you. So basically, here in this universe that she's built, cities tend to come to life, and when they do come to life, they are basically represented by certain avatars which take the form of humans, and these humans are basically random citizens of the city who kind of somehow get plunged into this new sort of consciousness where they represent a certain district or area of that city. So anything that happens to them happens in the city too. So for example, if you come and I don't know, you stab this one of these people, a big earthquake might happen in the corresponding part of the city, you know? So it's that type of thing. And each person here is basically a representation of a certain part of New York, you know? So, this is the type of thing we're looking at here. The writing itself was very good, and Kay Jemisin is an amazing writer, and she basically perfected what she was doing in this book because here she basically explores the streets of New York, the culture of New York City, the attitude of the people in New York City. So she does that very well. The issue is I'm not into that personally. I much prefer her fantasy work over this type of super realistic urban setting, even though like there are fantasy elements involved because we have this entity that is basically trying to possess that city as a whole and like basically try to bring in another city from a different dimension and put it on top of New York City. And a lot of weird things are happening. Uh, but like I don't know, the essence of the book just felt too realistic for me. I just didn't feel any, you know, interest in reading it because I'm not into those types of books. Now, if I was reading contemporary normal fiction, I would have been more okay with that. But when I'm trying to read fantasy, it just doesn't catch me that much, you know. Uh, but again, if you guys are into stuff like that, it's very interesting. We basically tend to explore the vibe of the city itself and the New York area in general through several people. We also have different city avatars come in. We have Sao Paulo coming in. We have Hong Kong coming in. And the Hong Kong part was done expertly well, but the Sao Paulo part, I just wasn't that. I don't know, I felt like the author didn't go that deep into Sao Paulo's psychology. Uh, so we basically have a group of people here in New York, each representing a certain district or part of the area, and they have to find their main avatar, their main person who represents New York City as a whole, and they basically have to join him. And the understanding is that if you join with that person, your identity will basically cease to exist. So these people they basically have to sacrifice themselves to be able to join with the main entity that is New York City to be able to save the city from collapsing. So again, it's interesting. Some people are willing to do it more than others. If you just want to read something that gives you like the perfect New York City vibe, I think this is the perfect book for you. Uh, but again, it just wasn't something that I am personally into. So again, I would give this another 3 stars. This isn't a horrible book. It's just not for me personally. Uh, there's the second book in the series. It's a duology as well. I'm not sure what its name is, The World We Became or something like that. But I don't think I'm going to read it. I might read it at some point in the future, but for now I'm just not that interested. I have other things that I want to read, especially by N.K. Jemisin, because she is an amazing author and she did a really good job with this. It just wasn't my cup of tea. So, this was it. I didn't have much positive things to say today. which is kind of sad. But yeah, hopefully the books that I'm reading this month are going to be more enjoyable. I'm actually going to be making a video on this coming Wednesday as well, talking about my TBR for this month. I have a lot of exciting new books that I want to read, that I have with me. And so yeah, we'll have 2 videos coming up next week. So what about you guys? If you watched this video completely, just tell me what books did you read in October? What you liked, what you didn't like? Was October a good reading month for you, or was it disappointing? And also tell me what you did in Halloween. Like if you read this and you want to give me, the little details about what you did on Halloween, I'd be very interested to hear. So yeah, guys, I'll see you all next Wednesday for another video, and I wish you a great weekend coming ahead. Bye-bye.